Good morning, and welcome to Star Trek Sundays. It's week 3. I'm Victoria, and with me is my co-host, T. Today, we're going to be discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario. At the top of the room, we have pinned the Star Trek Sundays link tree, which lists the episodes covering this theme that we'll reference today. Thank you, T, for curating a collection of episodes for us to revisit. I enjoyed my week's homework. Star Trek Sundays is a passion project for T and me and forms part of a new YouTube channel which will post highlights from the conversations on Clubhouse. Once we have a few videos posted, we'll link the channel in the Star Trek Sundays link tree. Once again, it was a pleasure revisiting the episodes I'd seen of Star Trek Next Generation and finally dipping my toes into the subsequent series and, of course, my first viewing of Star Trek Wrath of Khan. I'm really looking forward to diving into today's topic. We'll be inviting people up to the stage to share once we get through our introductions and our first question to T on the subject. So for now, I'll turn the mic over to T.
Thanks, Victoria. The Kobayashi Maru is a staple of Star Trek. It spans multiple generations and several series. It first appeared in the timeless movie Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. I actually didn't know you watched that for the first time, so that's pretty cool. The Kobayashi Maru was a simulation in which the cadets were faced with a no-win situation and tasked with captaining a ship through it. The Kobayashi Maru is the name of the ship that the cadets were piloting when they encounter Klingon birds of prey. The cadets being tested are not told this, but they effectively face 3 options: the destruction of the ship in battle, the death of the crew at the hands of the Klingons, or mutiny if the crew attempts to retreat. The test is designed as a psychological one to see how the cadets will react under conditions where the odds of success are not in their favor. The type of psychological test appears in just about every Star Trek series, so I thought it would be fun to discuss some of the harder questions that get asked each time the Kobayashi Maru simulation occurs.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. I was surprised at how often that comes up, but I think it's because it comes up so often in our own lives. So, as we've discussed, so we'll get into that shortly. So, thanks again. And this is the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse. We're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario. I'll be bringing people up to the stage to share your thoughts in just a few minutes. You mentioned Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which again, yeah, I just saw this week for the first time. And you've just discussed or given us a rundown of what the Kobayashi Maru scenario is. Can you provide a summary to remind those who didn't get a chance to review Wrath of Khan what was covered in Wrath of Khan? And then I have a couple of questions for you about that.
If you haven't seen Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which originally premiered in 1982, this movie is a classic. If you know it, if you know the plot summary, you know the plot summary because it was one of the ones where, you know, Spock dies at the end, and it's just, spoiler alert, 19, 20, 30-year-old or 50-year-old movie, whatever it is, at this point. You should go see this really great movie, 40-year-old movie, whatever it is. So in the movie, the Vulcan cadet Savick is piloting the Kobayashi Maru when it's attacked and destroyed by Klingons. Now, initially, we're not told this, but it's a simulation. And after the simulation ends, she challenges the ability to win given the available options. It's revealed to her that one person, Captain Kirk, was able to beat the Kobayashi Maru scenario by hacking the simulation and changing the parameters. Now, I chose this because, first and foremost, it was the first time we got introduced to the Kobayashi Maru scenario. It was also my favorite Star Trek movie, but I think most importantly, it highlights the schism between the mindset of the Federation, who are pragmatists and accept losses, and how that's compared to the cocksure yet results generating attitude of Captain Kirk, who believes there is no such thing as a no-win scenario, only a lack of options considered.
Yeah, I find that still a little bit perplexing because the way I saw it was he cheated. And so we ask, is he that good or is he reckless? But my question kept coming back like, is this the ultimate fake it until you make it? Because he goes down as a legend for passing it, but it turns out that he cheated. And yet I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to interpret that cheating as being, really smart, and was it just a hack? So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that, he demonstrated some of the out of the box thinking that's required of a captain in a situation like that. And I think that was part of the challenge, was to challenge them to think outside of the box, to come up with solutions that were not necessarily seen as available to them, even though the simulation was designed to only have three outcomes. I think that fake it till you make it is definitely a valid strategy in situations where it produces results. And I think that's one of the things where, he produced results, and he was not afraid to, send people into sacrifice, and knew the consequences. And I think that that was one of the things that got highlighted at the end of the movie, is sort of Spock was answering the question of the Kobayashi Maru. No, you don't have to lose. The whole scenario. You just have to sacrifice in order to keep the crew alive. And so I think that the Federation in their thinking was being too linear. And I think that Captain Kirk was demonstrating a critical aspect of actually being a good crew member, which is outside the box thinking. And then, of course, later the sacrifice of Spock.
Yeah, I did like the way it was bookended. The Kobayashi Maru was this layer in this movie, and you had the whole Wrath of Khan, but the way that it was tied up, with it beginning with this test that all these cadets had to go through, and then ending with the answer. That's sort of how I saw it, and yeah, it was a bit of a cheesy movie. It's 40 years old, but I was touched by much of it. So I really enjoyed that. I don't think that before we started this series, that I don't think I ever thought I'd sit down and watch The Wrath of Khan, loving the TV shows, but never got into the movies. And now I can't wait to see them all, just to see what themes they bring up. So, we've got a few people in the audience here. We'll bring them up. I just want to remind everybody that this is the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win situation. So I'll invite a few people up, and we can talk about the Wrath of Khan and the Kobayashi Maru, and we'll be getting on to talking about some of the other episodes too. There was Star Trek Next Generation, Coming of Age, and Thine Own Self, and so we'll talk about how the theme actually shows itself in those episodes as well. So let's just get a few people up to see what they want to say.
I recognize that the acting here is cheesy. That's kind of the joy of it. I think that it's important that this is one of the things that the overacting of Ricardo Montalban as Khan, quoting Moby Dick to Kirk as he activated the Genesis missile. That was, in my mind, part of what made the movie great, was this need to show this deep hatred and emotion, and Ricardo Montalban just owning it in terms of like that role and bringing forth that expression.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because we use the word cheesy, and sometimes it sounds like it's a negative, but I completely enjoyed this movie, every bit of it, and I don't know that if it was less cheesy, that it would have been any more enjoyable. Right. So, welcome to the stage, Sean. So, do you think, I'll just ask you the question that I put out to T, and which I was contemplating, and then if you have anything further to add, you can add that. But do you think that that Kirk was reckless, or that he was a cheater, or that he was just this good, and that we should all just think that he was that exceptional?
I think it showed that he didn't want to lose. So it was a little bit about ego. And yes, it was about thinking out of the box, but um, you know, we're talking about the original one, right? Not the 2009 Kobayashi Maru, because I think it's the same one. I mean, I think it's the same thing. So, yeah, I think he cheated. And that in life, sometimes we face our own Kobayashi Maru uh, situations and we can't get out of them. We have to deal with them head on. And but he, he was always an egotistical person, and that helped him a lot. And it was well played by William Shatner. So yeah, it was what it was worth. Yeah, you really should watch it on the 2009 reboot, the Kobayashi Maru maneuver, because it's just done really well. It's just done really well.
I just think that in the original, with the Enterprise hanging in the Nova and crippled, and the orchestral music swelling, that there was with Ricardo Montalban quoting Moby Dick, and Shatner, you know, desperately trying to get the warp core back online. That was a moment. Cheesy acting be damned. That was a scene that they were telling a story, and they wanted to tell a story about this epic moment, and I thought that they got that across. So
Yes, and it was so much better than the original Star Trek movie, which some of us Trekkies call the what do we call it? We call it the the the, the long blue movie, because everything was sort of in a different shade, and it just went on and on and on. So the Wrath of Khan was such a different movie, such an
yeah,
improvement.
like 6.5 minutes of just like flying around the Enterprise in the first part of the movie. And
And Spock flying through space for what seemed like an eternity.
it was an embarrassment as far as cinematography. Right?
Yeah, and I'm sort of surprised they got permission to go forward, but thank God they did, because it was a
I
disappointment.
think you bring up something really important, which is that they really humanize the people, and I think that was a good move in terms of making McCoy give Shatner, give McCoy give Kirk's character the glasses, and have them be friends, and have them be have the Kobayashi Maru scenario. I thought that tricking people into thinking that this is a real scenario, and then they pull back the curtain and no, it's a simulation. I think that they really stepped up their games in term of production on this movie. So I think you're right.
Yeah, the movie was just like some type of a episode continuation from the original series with better special effects, but there wasn't the connection between the cast that I was expecting. There was new people, of course, added, and they had their own backstory, which wasn't super deep, explored, and it was just sort of like, oh wow. But if you're a Trekkie, it's like, well, this is better than nothing, and this is new.
I get that. I get that for sure. I'm a big fan of the James Bond films, and a bad James Bond film is better than no James Bond film. Jamesy, welcome to the stage. Getting back to the Kobayashi Maru and the Wrath of Khan and Kirk. Um, what do you think? Was this? I'd like to know about the whole, when he goes down in history of being the only person who's ever been able to solve it or pass the test, and yet, he did it cheating, and there's this, um, this feeling that some people, like for me, I think, well, he cheated, so he didn't really pass. And other people think, well, by hacking it, he passed, and that makes him smarter than others. And one thing that I'd like to get to after Jamesy shares is perhaps how we see that in real life. Because I kept thinking, is this what some of these CEOs do when they cheat their way to the top? So, Jamesy, what do you think about this whole scenario?
Well, I think all of the Star Trek captains are kind of embodiments of doing what must be done. They all kind of play with like what their like guidelines are, and Kirk is very much like the space cowboy, right? He's the Han Solo of Star Trek. So, like his version of doing what must be done is just kind of like described by coloring outside the lines a little bit.
Well, that's interesting. Do you think that Han Solo is, I'm going off topic here for a second, but do you think that Han Solo was formed a little bit on the Kirk character? Oh, I'm getting some thumbs up here. Okay. Maybe that's a whole other show.
I wasn't alive back then, so I'm not even sure which one came first. But the parallel of like the rebellion being revolutionary America and the empire being England, I think is pretty obvious. As far as like that compares to Star Trek, Star Trek's themes are timeless. I think they refer a little bit less to the past and more to just like this is an issue that humanity's always going to have to deal with.
Not only is Star Wars a whole other topic, it's a whole other religion.
Yes, yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, maybe T. I don't know what you think. Maybe we should move on to try to incorporate some of these other themes in, so that we can talk about the Kobayashi Maru in general and not just one movie. I'd like to move on to the coming of age, and if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of a summary of that to see how that fits in, I'd appreciate that.
Coming of Age, The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 19, originally aired on March 14th, 1988. So, in this episode, Wesley Crusher faces the Starfleet Academy entrance exam on Relva 7. Wesley's entrance exam concludes with a surprise psych test in which he thinks an emergency has occurred and he has to rescue his fellow cadets from a smoke filled room. It's not until after he's made the hard decision to sacrifice one cadet to save himself and another cadet that the true nature of the test is revealed to him. I chose this episode because while this doesn't actually get referred to as a Kobayashi Maru scenario, it's clearly an example of the same thinking of the Federation, with psych evaluations on cadets using no-win scenarios. In the end, Wesley learns a critical lesson about the hard decisions that get made aboard a starship, and how those same types of choices got made, and that led to the death of his father.
Right. Yeah. That was interesting and deep for me, because it wasn't just that they were testing him, but this test that they give to the cadets is personalized for them. And I wondered whether it was not just personalized because they knew that this was his fear based on what happened with his father, but that it was to help them heal through some of this, because he didn't get in, he didn't pass and get into the academy this time, but there seemed to be some revelation he had with respect to his father. And if I'm correct in this, it was Picard who had to make that decision, which ended up leaving Wesley's father and Beverly's husband to die. And so that was just again one of these things where it seems so real. Like this is science fiction and it's way out, but there's still these human things that we go through. So, Wesley had to make this choice to save one of these people. And in my estimation, he saved the person who needed the physical help to move. The other person couldn't move because of his fear. And so he just wasn't able to save that person. It's slightly different from some of the other themes that we'll talk about in or scenarios in some other episodes. But that choice and the thought of Picard having to live with the choice he made that left a father and husband dead, and then Picard having to work with Beverly and almost help raise Wesley. I kept thinking about Picard having to live with that decision, and perhaps that was what Wesley was doing too, was he could empathize a little bit more. And so what I wanted to do was move this into like talking about the hard choices we've had to make. And so I wonder if you've got any examples of a hard choice you've had to make that has been similar or might fit this scenario.
I think you touched on a couple important things there. First of all, yeah, it was Picard. Yes, yeah, did have to live with that decision, and that was really a topic that got brought up frequently. Was that hard choice and having to live with that, even though it was sort of brought up in a very subtle way. A lot of the times, it wasn't linked together in an obvious way. It was linked together in a very unobvious way, and so. I think it was in firing people in management that sort of hard choices had to get made. Letting people go for the better of the company, sacrifice is always involved. I think later in life, the really hard no-win scenarios that I was up against were relationships and breakups and things like that. When you're faced with a situation like, you're in a relationship and you really love someone, but they're an alcoholic and abusive, and you have to leave them as a result because they won't, stop being an alcoholic and stop being abusive. That really hurts, doing things like sending them to jail and moving them out because, they hit you in front of their kid. That really hurts. These are no-win scenarios where nobody wins out of these decisions. Everybody loses. I lose my best friend and my partner. She lost her living situation and her best friend, and those were awful decisions. But then the other decision was to face an even worse type of destruction, which is to continue the relationship. So I think that those are examples of like no-win scenarios that we face where if we do one thing, we're gonna lose in one big way, but then if we do another thing, we're gonna lose in another big way. And either thing that we do, we have to choose the lesser of the evils. And I think that we actually end up choosing the lesser of the evils all the time, in our lives, in just about every decision that we make when it comes to law and justice and stuff like that.
And
Right.
sometimes we have to make decisions that are for the good of the many and not the one. So life can be tough and difficult and doesn't always have a happy ending like a Star Trek episode.
Right. Yeah. Well, some of the episodes I expect them to get wrapped up, and sometimes I'm a little bit shocked at the end. So this is Star Trek Sundays Room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win situation. And right now we're talking about the episode Coming of Age, where Wesley had to make a hard choice to save somebody while leaving somebody else, sacrificing somebody else. This was a test, but it was a test that I think probably left a lasting impact on him. And we're talking about the hard choices we might have had to make that are similar. Sean, does anything come to mind for you about a hard choice that you've had to make that is similar in nature to this?
I can think of some hard choices, but nothing as dramatic or as heart-rending and as long-lasting. But I can see that sometimes a choice that I wasn't expecting to have to make suddenly came up, and it was a surprise. So yeah, that's all. That's all I can think of right now.
Thank you. Yeah, my first thought about this when I thought, well, how does this play in my life? It does play in my life as I've worked as a manager and leader of teams, and having to actually remove somebody from a team in order to make the team stronger. And it's it goes back to that culling of the herd, and it hurts the person who might have to be fired, but it also might help them in some way. I hadn't thought of romance until today. And I was reminded of a time where I was really in love with a boyfriend. This was over 20 years ago. And we had been together for 8 years. And it was clear we were in love with each other. And yet I still felt that I needed to break up with him. It wasn't going anywhere. I don't know where I wanted it to go, but I felt like I guess it just wasn't healthy, and I really felt like, um, if I stayed in the relationship, I was sacrificing me and him, and it was a no-win, and I know that breaking up freed me, but it also hurt him. And so I guess in that moment, I was sacrificing him. I hadn't even thought about this, um, deeply until just talking about it, and oddly enough, I was speaking to this person yesterday, and we were discussing this for the first time in 22 years. So perhaps that's why it came up, and these rooms can be a bit cathartic. But that was really hard because, I felt I was in a no-win situation. I never even thought about it at that time in this framework, but it gives me a lot to think about now, and to perhaps reframe some other situations I'd been in, like having to be estranged from my father for 20 years, which was definitely something that it was a sacrifice, but was absolutely necessary. And so this whole topic has, and my discussions with T and today has given me a lot to think about. And I do want to welcome Steve and the director and Sid to the stage. I do want to keep moving, so I'll ask you guys to give a share right after we move on to the next episode, so we can get some episodes under our belt and then talk about the whole thing as one. So I'll just let everybody know that this is the Star Trek Sundays room on Clubhouse, and we're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win situation. I'd like T, if you don't mind, to invite you to give us a summary of thine own self, and then I'll ask the question, and then we can put it to the room.
Thine Own Self, TNG, Season 7, Episode 16. It aired on my birthday, February 14th, 1994. I remember this episode well because in it, Data suffers amnesia in a primitive society and has to discover why his radioactive rocks are making people sick without actually knowing about radiation. I remember it being cool because he has to invent a microscope and a way of detecting radiation using some of the same primitive methods that the initial developers of the microscope and Marie Curie used to detect radiation. Meanwhile, Troy has to, she applies for a promotion to an officer position and has to pass a difficult officer's test. I chose this episode because initially Troy thinks the final part of the test is in the simulation is a Kobayashi Maru style no-win scenario. But then she realizes she can save the ship by sacrificing Geordie LaForge and ordering him to go knowingly to his death.
Yeah, I thought, this one reminded me of that, of the train track scenario that people talk about all the time. Um, I loved this episode. I absolutely loved the um, combination of seeing Data in this primitive sort of scenario, and then having this sort of sideline story of Deanna trying to get this promotion. So I I guess my question first of all, my question is, this is a very simple one, and it's about the show. Was Riker giving Deanna a hint when he said, "I can't let you go forward with this. I have the ship to think about." Because that was the thing that triggered her answer. And so I just want to know from UT if he was feeding her the answer at the time.
In a sense, he was, because what he was saying to her was, the correct answer. But sometimes it takes a good friend to punch us in the face, and I think that's also what he was trying to do. So, being fed the answer in this scenario isn't necessarily a bad thing, because the important part is that you learn the lesson, and that if it took him punching her in the face and saying you're not good enough in order for her to come around and say, I get it. The ship is more important. Then that's what it takes, for her to learn the lesson. And I think that the important outcome of that was her sort of going, questioning, am I really ready for this? And Riker sort of, being his typical smug self and going, yeah, I know, is that, that's sort of the point I was trying to make to you, and everything. So I think there was definitely, a big hint coming from him, at least.
Yeah, do you mind if I step in with that?
Sure, director, go ahead.
So I agree with T. It was, as a commander, what he was trying to make clear to her is that even though he values their friendship, he can't give her the answer because his responsibility is to the crew and the greater ship. So he was giving her the answer by demonstrating how it applies. And it was up to the student, in this case, his friend, sometime lover, whether or not she could hear the lesson that he was imparting, or whether she was going to reject it because of the source, right? It was a demonstration of relational respect. Could she and she's a psychologist, she's Deanna Troy, of course she was going to get it, because that is who she is, and that's why he could trust her by giving her the answer that way. I think we are building in a lot, unless T was the scriptwriter on that episode. But in my own life experience, when I've dealt with command and intelligent leaders and stuff like that, when they have set the board for me and then allowed me to arrive at the understanding, the lesson is a true lesson, because if someone gives me the step by step, I'm still going to balk at it. The idea of saving who I can save and accepting who is lost is a difficult lesson to internalize unless you truly understand it. Like, I think it was made, and I just got distracted before I landed my plane. So I land my plane.
I think that was right on topic. You nailed it in terms of, a commander demonstrating to his student, and teaching her the lesson. I think that was right on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I had another question that was about Geordi. When she finally goes into this the simulator, and of course this is a simulation, so who knows I'm sure it was as accurate as they could make it. But what about Geordie and those like him in service? Are they not also making the decision? So this was the question I asked myself. Isn't Geordie part of that decision? And then I thought, well, what would he do? He couldn't run away anywhere. It's not like he could go AWOL. His it was either he die as one and saves everybody else, or he refuses to do it, ties himself to a post somewhere, and then dies with everybody else. So he was going to die either way. But it got me thinking about the part of the person who's sacrificed, because sometimes they don't know they're being sacrificed, but sometimes they do. And I just wasn't sure if anybody would have any experience with that. And certainly it doesn't have to be a death sacrifice, but has anybody been that person who needed to sacrifice for the greater good, sacrifice themselves for the greater good? We'll start with you, T. Have you ever had that experience? And then we'll open it up to the rest of the people on stage.
I know I have, and I can't think of a time off the top of my head. But I think that there are certainly situations where I have stepped up and volunteered to do that. But it wasn't like a death situation. Um, it wasn't the situation that my father and my grandfather put themselves into when they signed up to fight in World War II and Vietnam, respectively. Um, and I think that it's the decision that every soldier makes when when he marches into battle. I think it's no different. Geordie LaForge is a soldier. He's a warrior, if you ask Worf, right? Um, of his own sort. And, his decision to sacrifice himself for the crew was no different than Spock's decision to sacrifice himself for the crew at the end of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which is why I chose this, because I think that these two parallels are strong.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a, a, a scenario that they want to share with us, or some comments on the situation?
Yeah, a while back, I once made a film about someone feeling guilt because someone was sacrificed in a Navy situation where shipboard, if you are sinking, you have to close the dog door, which is a door that can be sealed off, and now the rest of the ship is not exposed to the inflow of the water, therefore the ship may stay afloat. And sometimes you have to make that choice with people still in there, and you have to decide how long do you wait before you close the door to allow them to get out. And then what happens if you're at the threshold point of closing the door? We've seen this in fiction a number of times, but that's because it's a real thing that happens. It's a real hard choice that you may have to make if you're in the Navy and you're on a ship. So to understand how you're going to solve that problem is a valuable thing when you're in the military. Or when you're in life. Most civilians will probably end up have to make some choices one way or another similar to this, but because they're not confronted with the need to do that, they don't necessarily get to explore it outside of fiction, consuming fiction. One of the ways I exhibited this in the past is when I know that there was a layoff about to occur. I did the mental calculation of, well, I know I've been freelance before and I can get through this and I will figure things out, and I have family resources or whatnot. And most of the people that I knew maybe did not have that, that were going to get cut. And my salary was more than theirs. So I self-selected myself to be the person to be cut, because that salary could be spread at least two other people, right? So my cutting as a senior leader, but I was middle management, right? I wasn't actual decision maker. I was just someone who did my work, but at a higher level. I knew that I was the easy cut. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm living with the consequences of that choice now, in the fact that I just turned off my internet and I'm still waiting for people to call me back to get hired. I'm still living with the sacrifice. I'm not saying this because I'm engendering sympathy. I'm just explaining that when you make these choices in the moment, that is not an indication that you will remain okay with those choices later on, or that the consequences of those choices aren't permanent. At least if you're dying in the moment when you're making the choice, you don't have to live with the guilt of who you left behind.
Yeah, you know what? I'm really glad that you brought that up. We hear about people making those kind of sacrifices. And at one point, I had forgotten that at one point when I was at the beginning of COVID, when I was working at a private club, and we had to shut down the restaurant, but there was work for the admin staff and management. But we were really worried about our coworkers who were in the service part of the club. And a bunch of us had offered, when we never had to go through with it, because I guess once the higher management realized that we were going to do this, they decided they could make some sacrifices too, I guess. I don't know. But a few of us said, look, I have some banked holiday, and I'm happy to just give that to my coworkers. Right. Because we just knew once COVID hit and it was a real thing, for me, it was, I didn't know when I'd ever get to use, my holidays anyway. And so it was something we had to do right then. And so it wouldn't have been, I guess, a sacrifice in that moment, but I would have felt the sacrifice later when I wanted vacation or banked pay and it wasn't there. So I think we see some of these scenarios in our lives, or they happen more often than we actually recognize them. We have a few new people in the room, so I'm just going to let everybody know that this is the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse. We're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario, and we've discussed Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, coming of age in the Star Trek The Next Generation, and Thine Own Self. And we're discussing sacrifice in general. T, is sacrifice something that can be limited, or are we limiting our ultimate success?
Ultimately, I think that sacrifice is required for success. And that's part of um, how things have always worked. Prior to us coming on the scene, evolution required, death in order to produce selection, and that sacrifice is how we became the survivors of the fittest, in the terms of we're the ones that are alive today. And it's a truism that all of our all of our grandparents, our parents and parent and grandparents before them, uh, gave birth, and in turn sacrificed for us, gave up for us, and that's how we got here. So I think it's one of those things that we have to recognize, that when leaders come into leadership, the sacrifices that they make are part of that leadership. And things like people dying as part of COVID, I mean, that was tragic, right? But we got more learned as a society about how to deal with, infectious diseases, and we got better at that. And so those types of sacrifices are going to be how we as a society get better at things. Is we're going to encounter these hard things, we're going to have to sacrifice, and we're going to hopefully get better and continue onward, because the alternative is extinction.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's heavy when we talk about COVID because it's still here and it's still affecting us, and yet I think uh, it's a must to address those things and acknowledge that. There were two other episodes. I we don't have to do formal summaries on them, but there was one that was the learning curve in Voyager, and the Kobayashi Maru, that was the title of it, in Discovery. And but instead of going into that, I see where it's almost 10 to 11. I just wonder if we can open it up to the rest of the stage and invite them to talk about a Kobayashi Maru or no-win situation in their own life, and or what they thought about how it was framed in Star Trek. Does anybody have any thoughts?
So I guess trying to think about these questions you've been asking, like how it might apply to like my own experiences. The only thing I can say comes to mind is like maybe more of like a very micro thing in essence, but like when it comes to me and my friends and we're out and we're trying to get food, but they're short on money, or there's or there's just like they're not even short, it's just more convenient because we got a single check and I like just take it. And I feel like a lot of that is just like for me, I willingly bear the brunt of paying for my friend's food and not thinking about if they'll ever pay me back, because it's a necessary thing to have food. First of all, I enjoy their company, and I just think it just gets so petty. I'd rather compete with my friends over which of us is more generous, right? And keep the ones that want to play that game with me and maybe spend less time with those that like not just are like desperate and just never have the money, but like those that are like they've got the money but they never return the favor. Um and so like I said, it's kind of like a micro level of seeing that kind of maybe it's a no-win in some situations, but it's also just more to the fact of I'm willing to take the brunt of it with most of my friends because I just enjoy their company. I enjoy the fact that I can be able to help them out if it's in any way inconvenient to them. As far as my thoughts on the Kobayashi Maru itself, I notice there's always this trend where pretty much every time that it comes up, no matter what format, and I feel like it's both. It says something about writing, and I also feel on a level that it's a little lazy in terms of writing, and that there's always someone cheats, right? Someone cheats to win, and while I kind of understand like that's supposed to be the only way you could win the Kobayashi Maru, as far as like digging deeper into like, well, what does that say about somebody, right? Or maybe those who don't cheat, what does it say about them? The ways that they maybe went down with the ship, or maybe just tried to save everybody, right? They should be evaluated if it's a proper test, right? They say on their responses, but none of the writing ever goes into detail of like, we knew this, next position would be a great fit for you because you tended to always seek a means of sacrificing yourself for the crew, and making sure others survived while you never did, right? Um, it's really like, or if there's another kind of role or position, or maybe if there's some bad bad results, right? If there's something that's unwanted, well, then how do you deal with that in Starfleet? How do you maybe give them some kind of counseling or direction to say like,
Right.
yeah, you're trying to be the only survivor while everybody dies. It's just we're not going to give you
Yeah.
captain, but let's talk about this a bit.
Yeah, I have to agree. I do. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. Even from the people who didn't pass, because that it was to evaluate how they handle the situation, um, and then to know what they think about how those things were handled would have been interesting for me just to learn. T, I noticed that you unmiked when Steve was talking about paying at restaurants, and I wondered if you did that because I thought that there was some parallel with what you had said about the sacrifice, and to me, I thought that his risk of paying to be around people who, and developing a community of like-minded people, is sacrificing and taking a risk for ultimate success of being around really good people. But I wasn't sure what you were going to say, but I was going to pass it to you.
Thank you. Yes, what Steve said was brilliant because it triggered a memory. I was I think 16 or 17, 16 and 17, I should say. Um, uh, had a friend who thought I just was a great friend. I thought he was a great friend. We were really great friends for each other. We were really close. We'll call him Tim. We'll give him a name. Tim was a great looking guy, got the girls. I was not. I was awkward. I was, not exactly the type who got to sleep around, but he did, and together we would go on all these adventures, and he would want to go to Chili's and or not Chili's but Chewy's and other places like that, and I didn't have any money, and he had this big Ford that he would drive around and pay for gas, and when it came time to pay for money or pay for food, he would just buy me something. He would just, what do you want? I'm like, I don't have any money, and it's like, I don't care, what do you want? you know and the first time that he did this was really awkward, and then it sort of became a thing, and after, I don't know, 7 or 8 times of this happening, I was like, wow, this is really different. It feels different, and it became something that I admired and understood and started doing for my friends. And once I had a job later, 19 going on 20, but I remember very clearly, you know getting, I think for Christmas or something, $100 bill from my grandmother, and just going straight to Tim with it. And, here you go. Thank you for all the times that, you bought me food and everything. I wanted to give something back to you. And he just took it and he went straight to the mall with me and bought a hat for himself, with, $89 hat with tax or whatever, and that was just, it was just a thing. It felt really good to have a friend that cared like that, and it felt really good to do that for other people. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks for the story. That was awesome.
I was reminded of the times where I've I've paid for people, and some of my other friends have just picked up the tab. But sometimes that's because we know we're with people who need to dust off their wallet in order to pay for themselves, and it's just too awkward and embarrassing to kind of work it out. It's just easier on my soul to just get it done, make sure the server has a tip, and move on with the evening. It has nothing to do that. It's almost a selfish thing for me. But I guess ultimately over the years, it's a sacrifice of money. Sid and Alexander, welcome to the stage. Did you want to contribute anything at this time to Star Trek Sundays?
Well, I just want to say I actually have a scenario, if that's okay.
Oh, please.
Yeah, so I actually have two, but the one I think is more relevant is I very, very, very brief background. Had an employee that just had 2 kids, is on parental leave, comes back the Monday before Christmas. I think Christmas was on Tuesday or Wednesday. Comes back the Monday before Christmas, does something to make someone angry. That someone he made angry was a director or vice president level important person. And they say, you have to fire this guy. Now, he's just had twins. He's just come back from maternity leave, and it's the day before Christmas. And I told my boss that I didn't think it was appropriate to fire the person. It was a relatively minor offense, and that obviously, it's Christmas. Let's not do that. And so they told me that it was basically him, or it was him and me. And so I made the decision to obviously do as I was told, but I asked, could we please do it the day after Christmas? So we terminated the guy the day after Christmas when he returned to work, and he cried in my office and said, I wish you had done it the day before. because now I can't return those gifts I gave.
Wow. What did you take from that?
It was not necessarily quite the Kobayashi Maru, typical, there's some secret way out. It's a truly unwinnable situation. And all you can do is save yourself. And it's terrible, and sometimes we do find ourselves in those very, very tough spots. And there's no cheating.
Yeah. I mean, if you had to do that over again and it was Christmas again, would you take that as a lesson? And because I still think I would find it hard to fire somebody before Christmas, but knowing what you've just said, it would make me consider that. And because he could have taken the gifts back and had that money, I guess. But is it up to us to micromanage other people's lives as well? That's thank you so
Well,
much
I
for
think
sharing, Sid.
no, those are great questions. And I just want to say, if I knew then what I know now, that would be cheating, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Christy. I know you've been listening for a while. This is Star Trek Sundays in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario. What are your thoughts on this today?
Well, actually, I have been listening for a while, and I've really been enjoying it. I have never been here before, I don't think. But I just, when Sid made his comment, that was when I immediately felt like I needed to come on stage, because you can only ever make your decision based on the information you have. So I don't know, when you say, well, it's cheating to make a decision based on information I have later. I don't know. It just it just really hit me when you said that, and I was just like, um because you can only ever make a decision based on the information you have. And one of the other things I thought was really interesting, because because I agree with you, Victoria, when he cheated to win the I can't say it.
I had to practice too. Kobayashi Maru.
I agreed entirely, because I was like, it felt to me like it was cheating. But then when it all sort of, I watched the shows and all that kind of stuff, and I was starting to realize, well, if it isn't truly an unwinnable situation, he did think out of the box and figure out a way to win. And so, in a way, like, I loved the whole, well, he thought outside of the box, and that's really cool. So even though I didn't like that he cheated, it was also interesting to look at it from a different perspective. And anyway, I don't know. I'm thinking about a lot of things, and I guess I'm not making as much sense as I was hoping. But you really can only ever make a decision based on the information you have. And the fact that you didn't have that information, said, I don't know. It's interesting too, because I'm always I try to always be about full transparency, and about um, letting people know things, and also asking people, like, what is it that they want. So I wonder if you had been able to ask the guy, hey, would you prefer to be fired today, before Christmas, or after Christmas, because unfortunately I have to do that. I don't know, but the thing is that we don't live in a world where we can necessarily say that. So anyway, it was just some thoughts I was thinking. Thank you for bringing me up and letting me speak.
Well, I personally, Christy, first of all, thank you so much for coming up and speaking. I personally think that you are bringing up something that we should do an entire show on, which is making decisions on limited information. Because I think that that is a topic that actually gets dealt with a lot in Star Trek, and so I think you're making such a relevant and good point, and something that I'm going to consider heavily in the shows to come. So thank you so much for that contribution.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective as well, Christy. I guess I thought to myself when you were talking, if Sid told the guy that he was getting fired either way, that basically solves the problem, because I suspect that Sid didn't want to tell him before Christmas, because then the guy would have a low mood during the Christmas festivities, and we were just trying to, put that off. But at the same time, that just seems micromanaging somebody else's life in some way. What a tough situation, though. Yuri, welcome to the stage. We're just sort of going a little bit popcorn here. It's the Star Trek Sundays room in the Atheism Club on Clubhouse, and we're discussing the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario. Did you have any thoughts to share at this time?
Yeah, when I was in college, I was taking this security class, and one of the assignments was to attack the server, and the idea was to trigger this program that was on the server, but wasn't you couldn't directly trigger it. Like you had to break into the server to trigger it, which would then send an email to the professor and say like, well, they've successfully done this, and then based on how many of these you got, like you got either a good grade or a bad grade. And so we figured out a way how to trigger this email for the entire class. Like we found a pretty significant vulnerability there that he did not see, and we essentially had access to the entire server. And we did this, right? So we did this. We basically gave everybody an A in the class, and then the professor was very excited about this, right? He was like, well, basically you outdid yourselves, because the whole point, like you cheated, but also like that was the whole point of the exercise, right? Was to break into the server, and you did that like extra hard. So great, right? And so I think it depends, like the cheating depends on what the purpose of the exercise was. And so with the Kobayashi Maru, I kind of takes what in the new movie Spock says something like, not only did you fail the test, or not only did you cheat, but you also failed to understand the purpose of the test. And so that's kind of where I am on this, right? Because the way in which he cheats on the test, at least in the new movie, kind of bypasses the purpose of why the test was initiated. It's not applicable to the scenario. Like he would not have been able to do that same thing in that scenario had he been in that exact same scenario. And so if he had found some loophole, let's say with the Klingons, he had found some loophole in their systems or something like that, and it was applicable, then I would say, well, yeah, sure, he cheated. He didn't solve the problem in the way that it was intended, but it doesn't really matter because he still solved the problem. But in this case, it seems like, well, he cheated the simulation program. I mean, he broke into the simulation program, and that seems so he didn't actually successfully solve the problem at hand. So for me, that kind of defeats the purpose of the exercise, and so I'm not really impressed by that.
Yes. Yes, he avoided the test. He avoided what the test was, essentially. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. It makes sense to me now. I have a problem with cheaters. It's a trigger to me, cheaters and liars. So that kind of bothered me, but I'm not as angry now at Kirk. I just think, well, too bad for you, because you didn't get to find out how you would behave in that scenario, and that's what that whole thing was about. Yeah, that's wild. I did watch the other episodes that are in the link tree for this one, which was the learning curve in Voyager. And I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was I loved that episode. Of course, I all the episodes I've watched, I've loved because I like the show, but I hadn't watched Voyager before. And this one was where they had some Maquis personnel on board who were not behaving all that well, and Tuvok had to conduct training on them as if they were in cadets, right? They were treated like cadets, and I liked this. It was really interesting for me, and I don't know if anybody else remembers it, and I'm not quite sure. I'm hoping T can tell us about this episode and how the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario fits in here. And so I'll pass it to T. I'm putting him on the spot a little bit, but I'm hoping we can move on to that because I really liked this episode as well.
It was a fun episode. It started out with the disciplinary action by Tuvok of a couple of cadets, but the cadets just weren't interested in, being disciplined, and so further disciplinary action was ordered. And that disciplinary action took the form of like a real series of sort of boot camp style training. And that boot camp style training included a Kobayashi Maru scenario at the end. And so I thought it was a great episode because there was some really colorful characters, especially the blue alien running around. He reminded me of I think it was Mordok in the first in the first episode in the first movie that we revisited, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which brings up a point that you made, um, that's gotten made a couple times here. In the beginning, the Federation was doing the same test over and over and over. Kirk figured out how to avoid the test. And that was, a prompt to the Federation to start evolving the test. And I think that's why they started personalizing the test. And Victoria, you brought up a really good point about personalizing the test for Wesley, because when Mordok walked out of the test, he was rubbing his hand, like something had inflicted pain on it, or fake pain, or there was something going on there. And so I think that there was something very personal to him, as it was personal to Wesley. Again, that personalization occurred in this episode where they were given another Kobayashi Maru psych test. And so I think that there was, a theme that was being evolved over and over and over again here, of, showing the cadets what leadership really requires, which is sacrifice.
Right, yeah. I really loved this episode, and I loved the way they, sort of blended the 2, because there was the situation with the cheese causing a bacteria to go through and affect some of the, I don't know what they're called. They were bio batteries of some sort. And the person, the chef, or the person working in the canteen, was giving Tuvok, the Vulcan, the lesson in not being too brittle, or you'll break, and being strong and being able to be bendable. And that's when he sort of made a little bit of a change with how he was dealing with the cadets. And then, of course, ultimately how they came around to him as well, once he put out an olive branch. Just want to put it to the stage. If anybody else has any other comments, I really liked that episode and the Kobayashi Maru of Discovery. And I'll just remind everybody, if you like this sort of discussion, we're going to continue these, and the link at the top, which is the Star Trek Sundays link tree, has the episodes that we've discussed today, as well as the episodes that we'll be reviewing next week when we talk about psychological warfare. So there's 2 parts, the Chain of Command, part 1 and part 2, the Future Imperfect, and the Perfect Mate. And then the week after that, we'll be talking about the sacrifice of leadership. So I'm hoping that these topics interest you, and that the way we frame them with getting to watch Star Trek, and having these prompts to remind us of how these things work out in our own lives is enjoyable and productive. So I'll open up the stage if anybody wants to discuss anything about the Kobayashi Maru and how it works in their life, or what they've thought about how it was seen in Star Trek. The stage is open.
Was it? Oh, I
Oh,
can't hear you
sorry.
at all, T.
Yeah, his mic needs to warm up. Sorry, T. Go ahead.
Jeez. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. It takes about 5 seconds.
Yeah, it takes about, I don't know, 5 or 6 seconds. I can see what the problem is. I just don't know how to fix it. So I'm so sorry about that. I wanted to mention the character that you mentioned that was teaching Tuvok was Neelix, and Neelix was this wonderfully colorful character who really brought a lot of life to Voyager. And I think that that was one of the strengths of Voyager, was that it wasn't these, it wasn't really focused on like these space battles. It was more focused on like being um, part of the crew and working out these situations. And I think it was very human focused, and this was an interesting episode. And not all of them can be as interesting as this one, but I think this was really a highlight in the series. So sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so I just wanted to note, like, with so many interesting stories where people feel like they've been in a Kobayashi Maru scenario by having to fire people. I want to compare, like, look at Star Trek and its society, the Federation, and like ask yourselves, like, do they have to fire people? I'm sure they do, right? But obviously, like what seems to be the case, that's kind of hinted at, I think, is they have a guaranteed jobs program. And so having to fire somebody isn't a real threat against the well-being of the individual. They'll still move on and do probably great things in some different way. We definitely, I think, have the ability to do that in our society. Not to start getting political, but I just wanted to point that out, like the sheer difference between our reality and this fictional one.
That's actually kind of an interesting point because they don't have like a debt cycle, right? But what is something that we haven't touched on is there's the issue of like choosing to make a personal sacrifice. There's the issue of choosing to sacrifice someone against their will. But what is quite possibly the hardest issue is asking someone to voluntarily, knowingly make a sacrifice. And I think that's maybe the hardest of those three.
Yeah, having to ask somebody. I mean, first of all, welcome to the stage, Rascal. Welcome to Star Trek Sundays. Sid, that's really interesting because earlier when we were talking about sacrifice, I was thinking of my dad and my uncles and cousins who were all firefighters. And they went into it for, I guess, various and maybe common reasons. But they made that. Nobody went to them and said, will you be this firefighter? Will you walk into a burning building to save other people? Right? The ask is interesting. And even when people in the military are asked to sacrifice, they're already taking people from a pool of volunteers. Asking people to sacrifice is almost like the draft. But with that, that's forced. That's making that decision for them. Yeah, I'm trying to think of scenarios where we do that in real life, where we ask somebody to sacrifice. If anybody has any comments, T, go ahead.
It's your Wrath of Khan scenario, right? Like it's your James wanting to pull the lever and Spock saying, no, you're the captain. This is, I have to do this, or I can't be the one to make the sacrifice because I'm more important than you. You have to do this for me.
I think that's a really good point because, I'm thinking of sacrifice in terms of people are in relationships and they have to go and do jobs that they don't want to do just to earn money for the family. Asking them to go do that, we do that. Asking them to to help us with things or stuff like that. There's little stuff and there's big stuff, like asking a friend to help you move or something, or doing stuff like that. There are asks that we make, and then there are things that are asked of us. And sometimes sometimes they're asks and sometimes there are things that we just step up to do. But at the end of the day, if we didn't do them, somebody would step up and have to say, hey, can you help me with this, or can you do this, right? If we weren't earning money in the house, then that question would have to get asked: how are we going to pay the rent, right?
So it is really interesting that you bring up Victoria, firefighters, because that leads me to think of other roles, right? The jobs that require really just being prepared for that no-win scenario and being ready to be one who makes the sacrifice as necessary. Like, I'm an Air Force veteran, right? And during basic training, I learned how to shoot an M16. And it was made very clear to us that, like, in some given scenario, like, yeah, I wasn't infantry, so it's not likely, but I could be deployed and I could find myself on a caravan trying to move from one location to another with a team of people. And there would likely be infantry there available, but they still might hand me a gun and be like ready um, put myself on the line if necessary, um, for the sake of whatever the mission happens to be. And so I'd say, like, pretty much every veteran, right? Every veteran who at least passes basic training and goes on to serve, we we have the Kobayashi Maru scenario in mind, right? Is why I give a credit, despite I would argue it's a bad decision to make today. Like, it's an irrational one, in my opinion. But when you make it, like, I always say, you make it for the right reasons because you have that no-win scenario in mind that might be the case. It might have to happen, and you have to be prepared for it.
I really do think that you have the best parallel, Steve. I think that being a soldier is the ultimate, sacrifice that we can make, that someone can make, like my grandfather and my father fighting in a war, or any soldier. I think that them signing up to do that service for us so that I can have the freedom that I have, that is, the ultimate act of sacrifice. I think that's the best parallel.
So that leads me to this next question for everybody. But T, if you want to take it first, um, we see that this is a theme in this television show, and for people who love the show, they know what this is, they've contemplated it, maybe they've had these thoughts in their heads for the last 40, 50 years, however long it's come out, and in the military we see this sort of training, and perhaps even when you join to be a firefighter or a police officer or something, where you will be in danger, and then how do you make that sacrifice of you versus someone else? But it's led me to think over this week that there's this gap missing, that this is a kind of situation that should be discussed. These scenarios should be discussed as people are growing up and are in high school and college, and perhaps they are in discussed in some philosophy rooms. But I'm just wondering, two things: have you seen this discussed as a lesson to be learned for contemplation, to help people mature and to help people make decisions? Have you seen it discussed somewhere else other than TV and in the military or first responders? And if so, where? And if not, should it be? And what would that look like? So T, I don't know if you've thought about this, but I'll invite you to speak first, and then we can open it up to the rest.
I've certainly watched a lot of um, war movies, and the first one that comes to mind is Saving Private Ryan, and the first people to march onto the battlefield are the sacrificial lambs, and they potentially pave the way for those who come later, or sometimes they just get mowed down for no reason at all, right? And that's the ugliness of war. And I think that there's that type of thing is explored in a lot of good war movies, where depictions of these types of sacrifices get made in a very realistic way. Full Metal Jacket comes to mind. There's some even going all the way back to like Bridge on the River Kwai. That was a good one where sacrifices were made, right?
Yeah, right. I'm gonna I gotta date myself because I love that movie. Of course, I I wasn't around when it first came out, but I do love the music to it as well. Um, but you bring up war movies, right? I think these are really important lessons, and unless somebody watches a war movie or Star Trek, they're not getting to contemplate these things at a time where it would help them develop. Um, and I feel sometimes when I watch this stuff later in life, I feel ripped off that I didn't have this knowledge earlier. So, anybody else have comments on that?
I think like this speaks a lot to some things that I've wanted to push for forever. One, that I definitely think philosophy should be a subject, like a main subject for late elementary school kids and going into high school. It should be a major topic, in my opinion, alongside psychology, because people should be thinking about this at these sorts of things at this stage of their lives, where everything that comes and follows after uh, is of the utmost importance. It's like one of the most um, important priming stages in your life of development that that'll set your path into something that's definitely what you want versus been being propagandized or manipulated into serving the wills of others. And I think being able to learn how to think critically and for yourself is really important for that. Um, Also, to point out, this is what I've been saying a lot with regards to education and entertainment. Entertainment has a prime directive of getting your attention, right? While education has a prime directive of giving you information and knowledge, and the two are not mutualistically exclusive in reality. I always speak to this idea like entertainment and education should always try to be aspire to be the same thing. Um, where there's an educator who's boring, they're not really getting through and getting the attention of their students. Where there's an entertainer that's not enriching their audience, they're just filling our heads with jargon and useless crap, and it's just lazy writing, bad research on their part. But to your point, these movies, war movies and Star Trek, they really educate, and that should probably be a part of the more official process, I think.
Yeah, it's funny when you were talking about that. I was thinking about the YouTubers that I enjoy most, and some of them who've actually inspired me to not be so afraid of science and learn a little bit. Like I'm following this one YouTuber right now talking about paleontology and millions of years ago and hominids from tens of thousands of years ago, and it's something that I've never really cared about. Like I knew about it and that was great, but the way he delivers it just gets me going because he's funny and he's casual and so he might not be for everybody, but I have to say that what you just said spoke to me because he is entertaining. I watch it because I like him and I like his delivery, and it feels like the learning, though it was initially what I went for, it feels like the learning is secondary to that. uh So we'll probably wrap up in a few minutes. I just want to ask if anybody has any closing thoughts. I'll pass it to T first. So T, do you have any final thoughts on the Kobayashi Maru?
Not any thoughts on the Kobayashi Maru, but I did want to tease the following weeks, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, please do.
No, I don't want to edit it. So coming up, we have next week we're doing the psychological warfare, featuring the absolutely classic episodes, Chain of Command Part 1 and Part 2, in which Picard is kidnapped and drugged and forced to say that there are 3 lights instead of 4 when you clearly see that there are 4 lights. And so this is one of the really big acting moments in Picard's in Patrick Stewart's career, because I really felt that he brought his Broadway experience to this episode. Followed by Future Imperfect, in which Riker is part of he's doing a play on board the Enterprise about being a prisoner, and the play sort of comes to life, and he sort of gets trapped, switching between realities. And then The Perfect Mate, in which the Picard takes on someone who's supposed to be a perfect mate for someone else, and she sort of, you know, Picard gets like a taste of what it was like to have like a mate that's perfect, because she sort of like gets a liking for him. So I'm really looking forward to that. The week after that, we're going to be doing the Sacrifice of Leadership. I'm going to be getting the episodes pinned into the link tree, so you can go ahead and watch them ahead of time. And I really hope to see you then. I'm also going to set up the upcoming topic, which may be what was it? Christie's really great topic, making decisions on limited information. I'm going to think more about that, see if I can't work that in to future episodes. So I do hope to see you next week. We'll be doing this every week at 10 o'clock Pacific, right here in the Atheism Club. And I do hope to also see you in the hallways before then.
Thanks, T. Yeah, I'm so thank you so much for setting up the link tree and all those episodes, because I've enjoyed being able to go back to that, using that as a resource, going into the fandom page, getting a little overview of it if I wanted to read it, and then finding the episodes online and streaming them. It's just been a really helpful resource, so I appreciate that. And with that, I'll leave the room open for about 10 more seconds, and so that people can save the link tree, and then I'll close the room. And yeah, we'll see you in the hallways. Thank you, everybody.